You're listening to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, episode number 22. Today, I speak with founder of the Brain Breakthrough and co-founder of the app parenting community, Dr. Jessi Sigander, as we discuss what anxiety looks like with our children. Welcome to the Faith Breathed Hope podcast, where we gain inspiration and motivation from others who share their touching stories of renewing hope and discovering purpose in any circumstance. I'm your host, Christina Reisinger, and today we will be encouraged by another tremendously inspirational topic that will embolden you to release fear, begin taking small steps forward, and move into your God-given purpose to live and serve in this life. Join me for today's story. Hello, Jessi. How are you today?
I am doing okay. Thanks so much for having me.
I am so happy to have you here on Faith Breathed Hope. So, can you tell the audience who you are and what you do? This is usually the first question that I have all of my guests answer.
Absolutely. So I am Dr. Jessi Sigander, and I am the founder of the Brain Breakthrough. And I also co-founded something called the app parenting community, and we are a community that supports parents who are struggling with overwhelm, anxiety, and stress in their families.
Mm-hmm. And that leads us to our topic, which we are going to talk about today, which is what anxiety looks like with our children. And there's plenty of that to talk about right now with everybody being at home for the last several months.
Yeah.
And so guess just start by telling us what that looks like as far as what you've seen with your clients, your patients.
Yes. You can call them whatever you want.
So what you have seen, with people coming to you, has that changed over the last couple of months? Are you?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Anxiety is a really interesting thing. There's lots of different things that can trigger our anxiety. A couple of years ago, the CDC came out with a report that said about 1% of kids between the ages of 7 and 15 were diagnosed with anxiety disorder, and that's just the ones that were diagnosed. So we know it's a pretty common thing. If you add in a worldwide pandemic on top of that, we know that has ramped up for us adults and also for our kids. And so it can look really different from kid to kid. Sometimes it can be really big meltdowns. When this all started, my son had a huge meltdown. And once he calmed himself down, he said, "I'm actually just really afraid."
Oh, okay.
Really afraid. And there were so many emotions that he didn't know how to handle all of that. It can be really big tears over very small things. It can be hiding away in your room. Sometimes especially our kids that are older, it can be a lack of engagement or a kind of, pushing themselves away from the family. It can be, panic attacks. It can be sleeping the day away. So it looks very different from person to person, but oftentimes we find anxiety at the root of a lot of things that are happening in our families.
Right. And I can assume that it could manifest as not being able to sleep, too much sleep or not enough sleep.
Exactly.
How do you tell? So for the parent who is dealing with the meltdown and they say, you know what, my kid is too old to be this way, maybe they've passed the toddler age. And so the thing is that it could really be that your child is dealing with anxiety. So how do you know the difference between my kid is just, somebody's telling you they're spoiled or they get too much attention or whatever, and hey, there's an issue here.
Yeah, I think so much of as parents, I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and I think around 11 or 12, I thought, I have a 12-year-old, but we're going back to being 2 again in our meltdowns. And so I think some of it you just have to look at developmentally. They're going to hit things, especially around puberty, especially things that are really overwhelming that are normal. I don't know any kid, especially right now, who hasn't had some sort of meltdown because we've all been put in this kind of pressure cooker. I think some of it is just looking at them developmentally and realizing that when we have major transitions in life, that can cause anxiety. When we have things that are taken away very quickly, that can cause anxiety. Things going through puberty, that can. So I think it's part of it is just looking at them developmentally and going, what's going on in the world around them? Mm-hmm. Is there a reason for what's happening in the world around them? Is there a reason developmentally? And then if neither of those things are true, then you might have a different issue. But I think a lot of times the way kids are behaving is actually telling us a lot about what they need and what they may be getting at that moment.
Right. And you and I, you are going to be one of my speakers for the Grief Symposium this year. So we have kind of had a chance to talk about how this is not necessarily something that is in the moment. It could be something from the past. And I'm assuming that with kids, they probably don't know how to put this into words to tell you what's wrong, because maybe they don't know what's wrong. They don't know why they're angry or they're upset, because something could have happened a year or two ago, and for whatever reason, it's still bothering them. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what happens to us when anxiety starts. Oftentimes, anxiety can trigger something that we call fight, flight, or freeze in our bodies. And our brain has a fight, flight, or freeze mechanism at the amygdala. And it's a really important primitive reflex, because if we step outside the door and there's a tiger, we want our body to be able to fight the tiger or freeze or flee from the tiger. And anxiety can trigger that kind of primitive reflex. We also have our prefrontal cortex, which is kind of the rational part of our brain. It's the rational thinking. It's how we understand the world around us. It's how we make sense of what's happening in the world around us. And so our brain, we have the primitive reflex, but that rational thinking is kind of leading us. When we have anxiety and fight, flight, or freeze can get triggered, it turns off the rational part of our brain, and our body just works purely out of fight, flight, or freeze. And so this, for families, can definitely look like when you have a child who's having a complete and utter meltdown. And it does not matter what consequence you give them. You could take away the entire world. They don't care. Part of it's because they're not using their rational brain at that moment. The other thing that parents need to be aware of is that prefrontal cortex isn't actually fully developed until around the age of 20. And so when we ask a child who's starting to have anxiety, who's starting to have meltdowns, to rationally interact with the world, they can't if their lid has been flipped and they're working at a fight, flight, or freeze. What often happens in families is that my child will be triggered into something, and then I will be triggered, and then both of us are working in fight, flight, or freeze, and it's just really ugly and really hard, and they escalate, and then I escalate, and then they escalate, and then nothing good comes from that moment. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important for parents to realize, which is super counterintuitive, it's that in order to help bring our kids down, first we have to start calming ourselves down. Mm-hmm. Because our kids will follow our own regulation. And that's not my gut instinct when I feel out of control, is to work towards calming myself down. Mm-hmm. But it's one of the best things that we can start to do for our kids.
Right. And, I used to be a newborn photographer, so I kind of look at that as, when I brought mama and baby in to start taking the photographs, if mama was all uptight and worried, baby would start crying. So I had to try to calm mom down before the baby would calm down, because they very much have that deep sense of what each other is feeling. So that's interesting that you say that. So some of these things can come up, when they're very young, and it doesn't, from my understanding, it doesn't have to be something really, really big. It can just be something that happened that was big to them, that kind of triggered their brain and made them think twice, think something was different, something was off, and it bothers them. So then it creates anxiety later. And I love the fact that you said, mom and dad, you need to calm down first before that you can have the child calm down. So what are some of the things that you would say after mom and dad calm down that they can help the kid with, their child with?
Yeah, I think there's different things we can do. So one of them is we can do some deep breathing. One of them, which I think we talked about before, was this idea of using your five senses. When we use our five senses, it helps our rational part of our brain turn back on. So it helps our bodies we have to start paying attention to our bodies. So our body can't stay in fight, flight, or freeze if we have to actually start paying attention to what's happening inside of us. And so, for my son, if he's in the middle of a meltdown, sometimes I'll give him an Altoid or a cinnamon stick. And that triggers him. For my daughter, we've talked about, I'm like, what do you need? And she's like, gosh, I need a really cold glass of water because that will help my senses turn on. Or we can light a candle, or we can put on some music. I think some other really practical things that we can do with our kids is we can get creative with them, and we can get moving with them, and we can connect with them. And sometimes as a parent, especially right now, I feel like, gosh, I can see my kid let's take schooling from home, okay? They're working on something, they get to a math problem, it's really hard, and they just start to have a meltdown, right? And for me, I need to look at that and go, are they trying to be disobedient or horrible, or is there this anxiety of, I can't do it, I'm stupid, I'm not going to be able to succeed and meet the expectation? And in that moment, I can feel like, okay, so how can we step in? And it doesn't always have to be a lot of time. Sometimes I don't have all the time that they need, but I can set the timer for 10 minutes, and we can color, or we can dig a hole in the backyard, or we can play Legos, or we can play, a card game for 10 minutes. Sometimes it's just allowing them to be creative, giving them the space to say, we got to do something different. If we can get the body moving, that helps with our anxiety so much. And so, sometimes we go jump on the trampoline. And we walk around the block for 10 minutes. Sometimes my daughter, especially this time, she's 13, and as she starts to feel her anxiety rising, she'll say, Mom, can I just go for a quick run? I need 15 minutes with a dog. Yes, go. Please, do those things. And then sometimes we just need to connect with other people. And so, we have set up at this time, Zoom calls. My son talks to his best friends every day at the same time. And that point of connection for him has been life-giving, because he said, I feel the most normal, Mom, when I my friends. And I mean, even for me, when I'm feeling super overwhelmed, oftentimes I'll call a friend of mine and just say, I'm having a really good day. And so, taking that time to connect with your kids and knowing that it doesn't have to be an hour. It can be, Mom's got 10 minutes, and then set the timer, what can we do for 10 minutes? Okay. Can we blow bubbles? Can we play hopscotch? Whatever it is, helps kind of take your kids out of that. I think the other thing that we talked about is if we can get our kids to go upside down, if we can get their bodies to go upside down, it actually calms down their vestibular system. And so that can be doing cartwheels, that can be hanging off the edge of the couch, that can just be, hanging upside down just for a little bit. It helps just naturally begin to calm their bodies down. It's not a magic pill, but we're going to see that that anxiety begin to lower as we say to the body, hey, turn on your rational thinking. So yeah, I think those are things that no. And so when my kids were younger, we had a feelings chart we had on the refrigerator. And so it's just a chart, you can Google it, has a bunch of different faces on it. And my son, when he would get really angry, I would say, hey buddy, can you go use the feelings chart and tell me what you're feeling? And oftentimes I would just see the anger, but really underneath it, he was really sad, or he was really frustrated, or he was really worried about something. And he didn't necessarily have the words for it, but he could point to what he was feeling based on the smiley faces. And that gave me such a better understanding of where he was at and what he needed from me at that moment. And then just teaching your kids as they get older. Like, hey, we have now that my kids are older, we have a word chart. And sometimes, my son the other day had a complete meltdown and we were not getting anywhere. And finally I said to him, okay, I need you to go to your room and I need you to write me down what's going on, because I don't understand. There's a disconnect, like the way that we're talking back and forth, I'm not understanding what you need from me and it's not working. So go and take the word chart and write me 3 or 4 sentences to tell me what's going on. And just giving them some of those everyday tools they can use to begin to identify their own feelings and express them to you can help lower that level of anxiety.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. We have, I use an emotions chart with my clients as well. So you were talking about how it helped you understand where your child was at. However, it also helps them understand, because I've worked with so many people that don't know what they're feeling. They know it's not a positive emotion, but they don't know how to talk about it. And so when you present that chart, then it kind of clears things up a little bit more.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that is anger,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So, we do cartwheels, or not cartwheels, we do push-ups or running and stuff like that in between times where we get frustrated about schoolwork and things like that. So I think, like you said, get the body moving is a really big one. And I love the hanging upside down. We did talk about that. And I shared that with someone just the other day, and they thought, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. So one of the things that you said is, I think you said your daughter comes to you and she says, I'm feeling anxious. And I wanted to talk about that for a second, because there is an identifier, like the feeling, the physical part of anxiety. I know myself, I have suffered with anxiety here and there. And it's a funny thing, because you can look at it and you can feel it welling up inside of you. And it's almost like your heart starts racing, and, your head feels full. I mean, I'm sure other people describe it, differently. And then there's that, the difference between anxiety and panic, which is a very, very physical thing. When you have a panic attack, I've had those just before my daughter passed away, and I did not know what they were. I thought I was having a stroke or something. I didn't even know what it was. So can you talk about that physical part of anxiety?
Yeah. So I think one of the greatest things we can do for our kids is to teach them where they feel the anxiety in their bodies. And again, I think it's one of those things that we have to model. I think 5 years ago, if you had asked me where I felt anxiety, I would have said, I don't feel anxiety. It shut down my body, and I didn't want to listen anymore. I wasn't willing to listen. And now some of it is just that modeling of, I was somewhere, we were having a conversation yesterday with my husband about the school year in the fall. And I told him, I can feel the anxiety rising up inside of me, even as we're having this conversation. And so it's saying to your kids, hey, where do you feel that? Where do you feel that right now? Is that in your head? Is that in your tummy? Is that in your shoulders? I can tell that you're anxious. Where do you feel that? And then how do we help that feeling get out? So the other night I was having a conversation with my son. He very much likes things to be predictable. He does not like change. He does not like having to be flexible. And I asked him that question, how do you feel when you have to be flexible? And he said, I feel really anxious. And then I said, okay, but where do you feel that? And he said, I feel it in my throat. And I said, what? And he goes, yeah, that's why I clear my throat sometimes, Mom, because when I get anxious, my throat feels really tight. And so that's why I clear my throat. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've heard you doing that before, but I never have asked, why are you doing that? Or what's caused you to do that? And how are you handling that? And so some of it is when we have anxiety, the adrenaline starts to pump through our bodies, and our body has to release that energy somehow. And so then it's saying, okay, when we have to be flexible or when we feel anxious, how do we get that energy released from our body? Do we play? Do we go for a run? Do we have a long conversation with somebody? And some of it is just figuring out what's going to work best to decompress your child, because every kid is so different. But we get all this pent up energy from the anxiety, and then it has to decompress somehow. And so it's just figuring out what's gonna, for my son, he's very physical. He wants to be in my lap and wants me to hug him and touch him. And for my daughter, that only adds to her anxiety, right? So she needs space. And so some of it is taking the time to know your kids enough, and even having the conversation of, what do you need? How can we help relieve some of that anxiety for you? What does it look like for you to decompress a little bit when we start to feel anxious?
Yeah, as a mom, I have to often remind myself that my kids may be feeling anxious if something, there's something going on deeper than they're just not getting their way. I mean, obviously sometimes it's just that they're trying to get their way, but then, you can recognize when things are not that, and, there's something more, there's some anxiety there going on. And as a mom, I have to stop and remind myself, hey, you know what, maybe they just need to talk, because, and I see this as an adult, and I see this with clients too, is that a lot of times you talk about being able to release that energy. A lot of times we just need to talk without somebody trying to fix our problem. And so as you were saying that, I started thinking, well, maybe kids are the same way. I don't remember, being a kid too much about like thinking of things like that. But I'm thinking maybe my kids need to just talk, and they just need me to listen.
Yeah. And I think sometimes they may not even know they need it. And so sometimes, especially, like, I think it's great to do something and then I feel like those conversations come out. So my 13-year-old doesn't necessarily want to sit down and talk about her anxiety with me. But if we bake something together and we're doing it together, and I can ask those questions, or we can walk the dog together, or we can play, a card game together, it lends it the space to ask some of those questions that they may not want me sitting down in front of them, because who really wants to talk to their mom when they're 13? But when we do things together, it gives us an opportunity to have some of those conversations and decompress.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for the parent who said, you said they need to calm down first. They need to kind of find their coping tools first. What if you have a parent who's highly anxious themselves, and maybe they've made it to adulthood and they don't have a whole lot of tools in their toolbox, so therefore it can be a volatile situation? How do you tell them to calm down?
I mean, I always suggest a therapist or a counselor. I always suggest that, because find a good counselor that can give you the tools. A really great app is called the Headspace app, and it just kind of has background music that's super soothing. So a lot of times when people are struggling to go to sleep, or they can feel their anxiety rising, that app is really great. It helps us, just kind of pay more attention to your body and calm your system down. Working through grounding exercises. So when you know that you're feeling overwhelmed and you can feel that it's starting to come up, that you will, use your 5 senses. So figure out, use something that triggers your taste and your touch and your sight and your smell and the sound. That helps the body, kind of calm down. There's deep breathing exercises that we can do. I think it's just, it's being aware of it, giving yourselves the tools before you get into the moment, right? We need to start picking up those tools and using them now, so that anxiety turns up. But there's little things you can do. The other thing I do oftentimes with my clients and my kids, if I will put one hand on my forehead and one hand on the base of the back of my head, and I call it the peace blanket. And that, your body has to kind of stop and pay attention to that moment. And so oftentimes, if I'm trying to fall asleep and I can't, because my brain is just running, if I'll put one hand on my forehead and one hand behind my head at the base of my head, and take some deep breaths, that makes my body just go. Or if I am getting amped up because of my kids or because of a situation, sometimes I will say to my kids, hey, I need 2 minutes to step away, because at this moment I don't have the patience or the capacity to care. And so I excuse myself for a minute or two, take some deep breaths, do what I need to do, and then be able to come back and re-engage. And just say to my kids, like, I'm human, and sometimes mom needs a break to pull it together before we can move forward.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this before, just that power of observation, being able to know who you are, knowing who your kids are, what their needs are, what your needs are, teaching your kids to know who they are and what, recognize those emotions and those feelings and everything. And that is very powerful, because you come to the table with the tool already in your box, before it happens. And one of the things that we do that works pretty good is, we have music, classical music in the background when we're working because, I'm not a doctor or anything, but we figured out that what that does is it gives part of the brain something to do while the other part of the brain focuses on what it needs to do. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So there's that calming component. Do you, another thing that I work with people on, and I would think that you probably do as well, is writing. And you had mentioned earlier that you said, hey, look at the emotions and go write a few sentences. This is very therapeutic, isn't it?
It is. And sometimes I use that for myself when I can feel like just this angst inside of me, or I'm reaching my pressure point and I don't know why. I don't know why. And so if I will sit down and usually have a list of emotions in front of me or words in front of me that I can just look at, and then just set the timer for 5 minutes and write for 5 minutes, and I'll get to the end and go, oh, I didn't even know that's what I was feeling or why I was feeling. Yeah. And that is so helpful for me to understand where I'm coming from in that moment.
Mm-hmm. I love writing, and I've talked to my kids about having their own journal. We even introduced the idea of a prayer journal just recently. So these are all things that I think are very beneficial for people when they have anxiety. But like you said, the observation, the recognition is kind of the first step, and when you can't do that, if you do things like journaling to try to figure it out. Another thing that I have my kids do and we talk about is trying to make yourself figure out what you're thankful for. And that can be a super difficult thing because you initially say, oh my goodness, what am I thankful for? I'm angry or I'm upset or whatever. But I don't know the science behind this, but I think maybe it might trick the brain and say, okay, now I have
gratitude.
To think about the positive.
Yeah, I think the other thing that has become very important in my life, and it's not my idea at all. There's a book written about it. There's a Disney song about it, but it's the next right thing.
Okay.
Sometimes when I think about the future, it can be overwhelming and I can get super anxious. And oftentimes my anxiety is around things that could happen, not the reality of what's happening in front of me. And so if I will pull myself back and go, I don't know what's going to happen 3 months from now, but the next right thing for me to do is this. And then it's just the next thing, and then the next thing. And sometimes the next right thing is for me to go make lunch, right? Like it can be that simple, but it gives me something that I feel like I can control and a guide map. And it frees me up from going, I have to know what 5 months looks like from now. I don't. I have to know what that conversation is going to sound like. I don't. What's the next thing that I have to do in my life? And sometimes that's moment by moment, sometimes that's hour by hour, sometimes that's day by day. But in my life, in my anxiety, and especially as we live in this pandemic and move back into our world, and there's so much unknown for our kids of what the future is going to look like. Sometimes just being able to give them those guidelines of, we don't know what the fall is going to look like, but the next right thing is this. This is the next thing we can do, and the next thing we can do, and these are the things that we can count on as a family. Can be freeing.
Yeah, that sets you up for success because you're able to check off the boxes and, if it build your confidence, I'm assuming. So I have one other question about this. So I don't know if you can speak to this, but, kids have anxiety surrounding testing in school. And I know for a fact that my son, I guess he's in 3rd grade, and one of the things that they test on is multiplication and division, but it's not just the fact that they know the answers, it's how fast they know the answers. And this is one of the things, kills me. Well, this is one of the things he struggled with for years, is that time thing. And, I know that they can do like adjusted time in school and stuff if you have the paperwork drawn. But one of the things that I guess we say is if you're doing something, you can skip and then come back. I don't know. I'm sorry, teachers, if that's not what you're allowed to do, but I'm trying to get the most work out of my child, without him exploding. So, are there any other kind of things that you could say to soothe before, during, after testing? I guess after maybe not be the big thing, but before and during the testing to help kids with
Yeah.
that?
I think the biggest thing I would say is to use your 5 senses. So right before that test, pop in that stick of cinnamon gum and chew it. Or they have these really interesting necklaces that you can put like oils on them, and so they like the oil. So maybe wear that necklace, and if you'll just take a moment to smell, like, and really activate that sense, whatever you got to kind of work with your kid to figure out which of the senses helps them the most. But if you can give them those tools and just say, before we take a test, we're gonna, have a mint, or we're gonna jump up and down for a moment, or we're gonna to help calm your body down. And I think the other thing is it's so valuable to teach our kids what's happening. And to just say, oh my gosh, your lid wants to be flipped, your brain's lid wants to be flipped. So what are the things we can do to calm it back down? It's totally okay to feel this way. These are the things that you can do, that you can control to help your body calm down. And that's what I say for parents, that I also say it to adults that I work with who have anxiety, who struggle with speaking engagements or things that, going to situations they're really uncomfortable with. Man, if we can use those 5 senses to ground us, it's going to help us just take care of ourselves better during that test-taking time.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. So, Jessi, can you tell everybody where they can find you if they want to connect with you further?
Absolutely. You can find me at actparentingcommunity.com. We are a free community that is created just to support parents who are struggling with anxiety and overwhelm, and we'd love to have you join us.
Awesome. And we hope that all of you continue to be blessed and bless others. And thank you, Jessi, for being with us on Faith Breathed Hope. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Faith Breathed Hope is sponsored by the 2020 Virtual Grief Symposium, helping you to renew hope, find purpose, and move forward in your grief. Know that you are not alone. I would like to give a shout out to some of the sponsors of the Grief Symposium: My Good Grief, Sunshine After the Storm, and the SUDC Coalition. Thank you so much for your support. Find out more in the Virtual Grief Symposium group on Facebook, or register at griefsymposium.org. And I want to thank you for joining us on Faith Breathed Hope, where you gain inspiration and motivation to renew hope and discover purpose in any circumstance. Please like and share this podcast and give us a review on iTunes. Be blessed.